Okay, so you're all gonna set up your own drapery, and all you need is some fabric, which can be an old t-shirt. These are old pillowcases that were ripped and I cut up. I recommend something cotton or very like fine. You don't want anything with a lot of texture, and you don't want anything with print. So if you have a t-shirt that has like a print on it, a plain white t-shirt is great. If you can use the back of the t-shirt, you don't have to cut stuff up. I just keep on hand. I always keep my old t-shirts and pillowcases and stuff because I use them as rags in my studio and for things like this. And then you're gonna need some kind of structure to drape the fabric over. I have this thing that I use to hide all the wires, and a jar, so you could use a to-go cup, a mug, the back of a chair is great. Something so we're giving it structure and for the fabric to drape over. So you can kind of throw it on and then adjust it. And I'm doing 2 pieces just to give it a little more, because I didn't love the way it looks off the top here. So you can start to see already there are these cones coming through, right? And try to get some interesting shapes. Think about what you're gonna draw. Don't make it too complicated, right? And the reason we're draping it over something is because imagine we're practicing fabric right now and practicing the folds, but the idea is that this would help you draw clothing on a human form in the future, or some background elements like curtains or any kind of fabric, bed sheets, anything like that. So try to get yourself some of these simple cone shapes, something interesting here. And then you're gonna adjust lighting. What I've done is I've turned off all the lights in this room and it's daytime. So I have a light from a window coming in this way. So if it's nighttime, get a lamp out, make some adjustments to your fabric and see where you can get some good shadows. Right here, I'm liking this because I can see some of these cone shapes that I know I want to draw. There's something interesting happening here and there's shadows happening. So I see like 3 big kind of cone triangle shapes and this fun thing here. Let me go back a little bit so you can see there's some interesting stuff happening down here. So I'm gonna go with that, and you take your time to set yours up in a way that looks interesting to you. All right, now we're gonna start the drapery drawing. So I've created a frame for my composition, which you know how to do. Mine's 9x7, but you can make yours whatever you want. I'm using the multimedia paper from a sketchbook. And the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start with pencil, and you can use a light pencil. I'm using a little bit of a darker one so you can see. And I'm gonna just sketch out the entire composition so I make it fit on my paper in my frame. So this whole composition here is actually one big triangle, right? It's almost one big cone. So I'm lightly sketching out where I want these big shapes in my composition to be. So I'm thinking about the whole composition. And there's another triangle over here on the side, and then it comes in. I'm gonna ignore the wires and stuff there. And then I'm also gonna make these kind of map out where these shadow shapes are. So there's a big sort of cone shape here that comes all the way to the bottom and curves. And we're gonna keep refining this, but I just wanna start by getting kind of a basic map of where all my stuff is. And I'm drawing using my whole arm, not just my wrist like this, and I'm keeping it loose and I'm working throughout the whole page. So think about drawing from your shoulder, and I'm kind of using the side of my pencil here. Think about drawing from your shoulder rather than your wrist. Like when you're writing, you kind of draw from your wrist and you can get into details like that. But if you loosen up and draw from your whole shoulder and keep the grip on your pencil or charcoal pretty light, then it helps you get these big shapes in, and it helps when you start with the drawing. Okay, I think that is good for now. And then I'm gonna come in with my charcoal and start blocking in. This is a medium charcoal. You can use whatever you have, and start blocking in my big shadow shapes. So I'm gonna start on this side and just coming in with the side of my charcoal and filling in sort of a mid-tone, because then we know we can make it darker. And then I'm just leaving out the highlights. So I'm just gonna get this shape where I think about the, it's a pretty big triangle here. And then there's this fold down at the bottom that I'm just gonna make a little notation for, that to remind me, okay, that's where I think, as I'm getting everything in, this kind of interesting fold is happening. Okay, then there's a highlight here, and I'm probably gonna have to erase some of that because there's pencil lines, but that's okay. So don't stress if stuff is gonna move around as you're blocking in. So this is the blocking in stage. We have another large shadow shape, also kind of triangular, but it gets, so I'm still using my arm, and I have a light grip on my charcoal, and I'm just lightly shading in where I think these shadow shapes are. And we're gonna keep on adjusting, refining. So you want to, like we've been doing, get big shapes and work in layers of detail. So if I started doing this detailed area so perfectly and I forget about the rest of the drawing, then the rest of the drawing gets lost. Okay, and then there's another, this is all actually in shadow because the light is coming this way. So I'm actually gonna make a big, I know there's some highlights here, but they're not as bright as these highlights. So I'm not gonna leave the white of the paper anywhere on this side of the drawing. So I'm just gonna kind of come in. There's another little triangle here, and I'm looking at where it starts, the top of this triangle area, where it starts compared to where this fold starts. And I think I'm doing okay, because it's higher. So that looks pretty good to get that shape in there. And you can always blow if your charcoal's getting in the way. And there's a little bit of reflected light, but again, remember the reflected light is not as bright as the highlight. So it's still gonna have some very light tone on it. So I am gonna come across this whole side with more tone. And this comes out a little more. And then down. Okay, so that's kind of one pass of these large shadow shapes. So it's not looking like anything yet, and it shouldn't. We're really just getting started. So then we're gonna come in kind of layers and refine these shadows and highlights and find our core shadows, compare them to what we did with the cone shape in the sketch, and think about, where's your darkest shadow? Are there cast shadows? So right here in this fold is actually creating a cast shadow onto the other part of the fabric. So this is pretty dark right here, and then we see how it fades out. So that's what's going to make that look, that difference between the highlight here, that is, I'm going to leave the bright of the paper, and then it gets very dark, shows us that it's underneath. That's a cast shadow that's helping us see. And then it fades into a mid-tone, and then it curves around into a highlight to show us the way the fabric is folding, to create that volume and three-dimensionality. So I'm gonna very lightly keep on shading this, and I'm using the direction of, I think, how the folds are going and how the fabric is going. And I'm using, this is becoming more of a darker, sharp line out here. And I'm thinking about where this shape starts. And I had made comparisons, so I'm gonna leave some space here because I see there's a highlight. So I'm not getting too detailed yet, but I'm gonna add a little more shading here to think about what this highlight line looks like. And then I'm going to continue on the other side of this highlight, and I'm gonna continue making very light mid-tones, and I'm going over the other part of my shadow because that's only going to be darker in here, because think of this as like a little valley or a dip. So since I already have tone there, going over it in another layer is making it darker, and then I'm fading it out to the tone that fades into the highlight. So you using those shadow shapes that you've already built to darken as you go. Okay, this does something funny in here too. Does a little, so I'm just like almost making notations for myself of where things are. I'm not getting too into the details, I'm building it up. And then we have another really sharp line here as opposed to a soft edge. And this sharpness is again created by a core shadow similar to here, where we have a highlight because the fabric is popped out. And then we have a cast shadow created from the fabric being folded over. So it kind of goes this way and then curves back up. And then I'm gonna fade that in because it fades right out into the midtones here. And then this gets narrow at the top and kind of turns like this and then comes out. So I need to get more of that in, and then we have a triangle shape. All right. All right, so we're building up in layers. I am going to focus on this half right now so I don't take forever. So we would keep on building up in layers, and I'm gonna focus on this fold here so this video doesn't end up being too long. If you have a lot of charcoal and you're smudging because you have your wrist down like that, well, the first thing would be to try using your elbow and shoulder. So working from your shoulder, feel the movement come from your shoulder and hold your charcoal lightly, and then your charcoal is the only thing touching the paper. If that kind of drawing is not working for you and you have no idea what I'm talking about, you can take a clean sheet of printer or computer paper and you can just place it down so you can have your hand on the paper. And you can use this for drawing, for any kind of drawing, for doing details. So if you need to have your hand on the paper, I recommend putting a clean piece of paper down, and you just want to put it down and then lift it up. You don't want to smudge it around with your hand on it, right? Because that's going to smudge your drawing. So it's just like place it, leave it. You can even tape it if you're working on an area, and then take it off. I'm going to continue on this side so you can see how I build up detail without this video taking forever. So at this point, I am needing to refine the highlight on the edge of my shape, and that means I want to add a background in. So I often do these vertical lines for the background just to differentiate the background from, you know, whatever else I'm drawing, because this has lines going everywhere, and if I keep my background lines all similar, it just helps me figure it out. I'm going to ignore the little box behind it and just do the wall, which is painted a dark color. So as we're always making comparisons between values, so that dark color is darker than the highlights on my fabric, but in some places it's lighter than these cast shadows. So I'm just going to be aware of that. I'm coming right to the edge here. And then we have a table, which I should have thought about a little more because it's at a strange angle, but that's okay. So that's going to be another tone here. Okay, so I'm going to continue defining this edge with the background. So I'm defining the highlight still pretty loosely, but it's a little bit curved. And then we have the top of that bottle it was sitting on. And I'm going to come in here and add, you know, there's some more tone in here. So I'm going to get that in. Still using the side of my charcoal. And as I'm making this darker, I'm going to fade it out so it makes sense that it's the wall. And I'm coming down and just giving this a more defined edge, because this is a very sharp edge where the highlight of the fabric and the wall connect. So think about sharp edges versus soft edges, and that's going to help you create more realism. So this is a very hard edge, and I'm going to continue refining it. And I'm also going to continue, now I'm using a little more of the point of my charcoal. And if you don't have a charcoal pencil, you can sharpen charcoal sticks. And I'm gonna keep refining this, and there's this shape here. And I'm going to keep adding more tone. And since I already have tone down here, it's easy to fade into what's happening against this highlight where the tone gets lighter and it kind of turns, I'm curving it, it kind of turns with the form of this cone triangle shape here that we have. So I'm using the curves of the form of the fabric, and I'm thinking about my edges. We have a harder, sharp edge here where the wall is, and then we have a softer edge as this highlight is turning into the shadow shape. And I can see as it gets further down, this highlight gets a little wider and it softens up a bit. It's not as sharp. So the kind of triangle shape is getting bigger and softening. And we're getting down to this area here, which I'm gonna work on in a little bit. And now I'm seeing this whole thing can use a lot more tone on it because we have another sharp edge here. So I'm kind of defining where my sharpest edges are. And this has a little bit of waviness to it, which you can add. I know I'm not making it exact, but talking and drawing can be a challenge sometimes. And that comes down, let me define this shape a little more. So it goes up and down, and then it meets this edge of the highlight. comes back down here. And I'm getting a little distracted by the pencil lines and where I've gone over. So I'm taking my kneaded eraser, cleaning it up, making a point, and I'm gonna come in and just clean up where this highlight is. So you can always use your eraser to come in and clean up those highlights. You don't have to, but for some people it can be distracting. You can also come in and like lighten up some of this if you went too far, which is nice. And then you can always go back and add more charcoal. So I'm wanting to keep this really clean, and it's a kneaded eraser, which cleans itself. So I'm just going over and over and kind of using it like silly putty or something to get it really clean. Okay, working on this edge between this highlight and this shadow. And we see this coming out like that. Comes out like that and then goes down. It's a very narrow highlight here, but I'm gonna leave it a little wider for now, just while I'm getting everything in here. Okay, so I'm gonna keep on adding more tone, and now I'm gonna come in with a darker, that was like a medium charcoal, and this is a softer one that's a little darker. It's actually 6B, some say soft, hard, or medium, but this is a softer one. So it's gonna add more of a darker tone. And so now that I know exactly where this is, I'm just gonna start adding more tone here. And I'm gonna come in and maybe refine this a little bit where the darkest parts are. So you're always making comparisons of what's darkest and what's lightest. And I'm kind of making these scribbly shapes to fill in and get this edge the way I want it. And just keep filling it in. So it's similar to the cone, but just not as, perfect as that cone shape is. And I'm adding more pressure and darkness when I'm next to that edge, that sharp edge where there's a bit of a cast shadow because it's overlapping. So this part is going back into space, and then the highlight of this whole thing is creating a cast shadow onto the fabric here. So this is why I make you do those shadow diagrams, so you can start like picking it apart in real life and breaking it down to simplify stuff. Okay, let me work on, in case you have, these are these simple cone shapes, and that's how I would keep going with each one. And in case you have some folds that look like this, we want to think about, again, the sharp. I'm gonna go back to my medium charcoal pencil before I get too dark. I'm gonna think about the sharp and the soft edges. So I'm gonna bring this out even more because this is there's a very narrow highlight here that is giving us this structure, and then it comes down. And we see this fold has a little bit of shading to turn the form here, and then we have just a highlight and a very thin highlight. So I'm gonna leave the white of the paper, and this is all in shadow. I'm gonna leave the white of the paper, and then I'm going to fade this out. And you can even exaggerate it a little bit like I'm doing. So I'm making kind of an outline of the shape that I see. And this then comes in, and then the shadow lightens up a little bit. And then goes out like that. So I'm thinking about how the fabric is moving. And then we have this fold here. which comes in and makes a very, sorry for the chalkboard noise that makes. Makes a very sharp highlight, very sharp line with this highlight. And I'm just making lines kind of going into this to show that the fabric is soft, you know, and not just a straight line like metal or something would be. And I'm filling this in. This gets very dark and then fades out again. So we can see that there's folds here. Now I need to fix this. And this turns again. This has a little divot here. And I'm adding more tone, and it's going to, let's get this whole shape in here. Come up, and this makes a shadow. Okay, let's see. It's not looking correct to me. So I need to figure out what I am not getting here. And I'm always just refining these shapes. So I have the turn here. I'm gonna go from top to bottom on this little shape. This needs to be more connected. So we know that this is all one piece. I just need to keep going. I think I got too detailed there, and I need to keep going with other parts of the drawing and come back to that. So if you feel like you get stuck on something, keep going, and I'm gonna keep adding tone here to turn this highlight form. And we have some of these little, you know, crimps in the fabric or wrinkles that make it look like fabric. And you don't have to draw every detail like that. You obviously can if you want, but you can kind of just do the basic stuff. Okay, I'm gonna fade this out a little more into the highlight so it looks like it's turning. And then we have it getting darker over here next to this next highlight. You know, this is how it keeps going, right? We keep defining the highlights. It gets really dark in here where it goes back into space, right? Okay, let's see if getting in this kind of shape helped me in any way. I'm ignoring the little frayed edges on my fabric because you do not have to do that kind of detail, and you can take your artistic license and ignore that stuff. Okay, so this is like a cone shape here. We have our cone shape, and we have this shadow shape. I think I'm gonna come in with my eraser and define some of these midtones a little more, because I think this is where something funky happened that is throwing me off. Of course, when I practiced this, it looked 100 times better, but that's always what happens, right? Let's see, I think this shape too has to go out a little more. So I'm gonna try, sometimes it's hard to get the charcoal up when it's really dark, but I'm gonna try to get it as much as I can. Also, the nice thing about drawing things like this, really anything that isn't an animal or human, you know, with drawing the human form, we see humans all the time, so we know if some proportion or something's off. if you're drawing a piece of fabric or a tree, no one's gonna know, hey, that fold wasn't exactly there in that place. So it's kind of nice if it's not perfect. But of course, for this demo, you're watching me draw and I'm showing you the picture of what I'm drawing from. Okay, I'm gonna just give it a little more structure here to try to make it look more like it looks in real life. And I'm gonna fade this stuff out and just coming in with like circles and small lines to fill in some of this space. And then this, I'm gonna fade out into here. And then I'm gonna make this dark shadow line again. So you get really dark in here. I think this is one of the darkest parts of the drawing. So I can really go for it here. And I think this is curving. Like that. And this is a lighter tone, but it's still coming out in kind of I'm using the curved lines to give me more structure to my shape and thinking about what's happening here. Okay, let's build this into it. This needs a little more tone. I'm going to use the side of my pencil, charcoal pencil, to bring it out. And let's see what's happening here. This is overlapping, so there's more tone here. See another triangle coming, connecting these two things, this fold, and then one coming out here before it meets. So there's this curve. So I'm thinking about the shapes. There's this curve. There's like a little triangle. And then there's this triangle up here, and then another one coming around here, which gets complicated. This comes like that, and it meets it up here somewhere. So this is the area I'm working on. You can really get lost in this stuff too, and again, you don't have to do anything this detailed. Just in case you want to, I want to show you how to do it. So I'm just refining my edges. I'm gonna come in with my darker, softer charcoal and just get this going pretty dark here so I can get the overlap. And I'm softening the edge into that shadow. Okay, and then you just keep going. Now I got really dark down there, so I can get darker in these areas. Okay, I know this video is getting long, so I'm gonna stop soon. It's hard to stop sometimes. I really like working with charcoal, and you can get lost in this, almost like a meditation. And you can keep darkening and refining your edges and thinking about where your highlights are, where your midtones are, where your reflected light. You can start filling in the background more. And again, with the background, if you want to take a smudge tool and do this kind of blur in the background, I think that's kind of fun to do. So you can differentiate between what's the background and what's your fabric. If you don't have a smudge tool, you can use your fingers, you can roll up a piece of paper towel and use that, same thing. I just have these old ones that I used forever. So, all right, so keep going. You can also, if you really want to smudge, if you're a smudge lover, and I told you in other projects not to smudge, you can come in and smudge some of this stuff. Totally up to you. You don't have to. That actually might have been what could help me with this whole area, getting that figured out. But if you're gonna smudge, just make sure you have a lot of charcoal down on the paper to get it to soften it up, because you can really start to soften things here. What I don't want to see with the smudging is like what happened here, where it's just like you're drawing with the smudge. First, get all your marks down, all your lines down, to get everything in the right place, and then you can use the smudge tool as a tool to soften some edges. And then you can come back in, usually after I smudge, then I would come back in and re-sharpen. You know, this is a sharp edge, so I don't want that to be too softened. So you can come back in and do some tone over it to make it look more intentional. Like up here, I would just add more. And then you can do layers of kind of smudging a little bit, coming back in with more charcoal, and then smudging again to make it look, to make the edges look the way you want them to look. All right, have fun with this. Of course, I didn't do the whole thing. If you just want to focus on a couple folds, you can too. I know this takes a long time, so just do the best you can. It's okay if it looks totally abstract. I just want you to try. Have fun with it.